What is up, Tolkien Poppers? It is Nick here with another Tolkien Pop episode, where I get to talk to one of my really good friends, Ryan Does, who is the host of the Across the Bifrost, the Mighty Thor podcast, as well as the Skipping Church podcast. And Ryan is a good friend that I met through Theology Beer Camp, which is a conference that we have attended yearly for the past 3 years, and it's exactly as how you would imagine it. So I'll leave that to your imagination. But what I won't leave to your imagination is the conversation that Ryan and I have, which is about Thor, Tolkien, and the bridge that brings them together, which is the poetic and prose Edda. And so Ryan basically gives us a little crash course into the history of the Mighty Thor through Marvel Comics. We talk about the current state of Thor and storytelling in the comics as well as the MCU. And I talk about Tolkien a little bit in their mix there, but this is really just about Ryan's experience as a Thor fan, experience as like a just huge knowledgeable person about Thor. It's wild. And just connecting our experiences with these various IPs and how they have impacted our lives and why that's important. And we wax a little philosophical at the end, and we leave it open for a multiple part series on Thor and Tolkien and mixing all that stuff together. I don't know. Ryan said he's down for it, so hopefully he will be. But I will have links to all of his stuff in the show notes that you should go and check him out. But without further ado, I will leave you to listen to Ryan and I talk about Thor, Tolkien, and the impact of pop cultural things in our lives. All right, I will see y'all later. Peace. What's up, everybody? This is Nick, and welcome to another episode of the Tolkien Pop podcast. I am here with Ryan Dose, who is an overall amazing person. He is the host of Across the Bifrost, the Mighty Thor podcast, the Skipping Church podcast, and he is a super nerd, a bearded,
very true,
bearded guy, and just a DILF that all of us aspire to be. So
I did actually get called a hunk at work today, which was very weird because that compliment does not get thrown my way a lot.
Now, who called you a hunk? Because
okay, not to get off on too much of a tangent, but in my job, I did a little bit of a above and beyond favor for one of my accounts. And they said, well, before you leave, it's a grocery store that also has, like food in the back. They're like, grab something to eat on the way out. It's on us. And I said, awesome. The way they split up their pizzas is in quarters. And so a quarter of a pizza in their restaurant area is called a hunk. So I said, I'll take a hunk of pizza. And one of the ladies in the back said, that checks out, that a hunk would want a hunk. And I'm like, wow, how do I take that? How do I take that? Nick knows my wife very well. I'm like, Kim would be like, oh, whatever, just take it as a compliment. But I'm like, I can't be too stoked about this. Like, I've got to temper my response to this. But yeah, I got called a hunk today, which was so weird. You have so many more better looking friends, Nick, and I am not the one that should have gotten thrown at.
No, hunk is very fitting, very fitting. We'll talk about, because there's a whole Pete Holmes bit that he does about being called like a nickname by a stranger,
Okay.
But I won't go there. I'll send it to you. It's fantastic.
Fantastic.
But Ryan, obviously a hunk, and we're here to talk about two things that we love. One, Ryan loves Thor, along with other things, but he is the Mighty Thor guy. And I love Tolkien.
Yes,
and we're
quite the enthusiast.
And so we've been friends for like 4 years now.
Coming up on, it'll be 4 years in October.
Man, wild. Yeah,
Wow.
4 years. And we met just, I won't give us the origin story, but we met nerding out at a conference called Theology Beer Camp.
Oh yeah.
And we were talking about our respective, specialties and interests. And
Our
so
fields of study.
our fields of study. And so we've been talking about this since the end of that beer camp about what's the thing that brings these two things together, and it's Norse mythology. It is the poetic and prose Eddas,
Yeah.
and we've been talking about it forever. And finally, we were like, you know what? Fuck it. Let's go. Let's get it.
Yeah.
And so here we are. But before we jump in, Ryan, I didn't know if you would want to say something about yourself. If you've got, I don't know what the laws are in Nebraska, about beer. I don't know if you've got a little drinky drink.
So here's the thing. So Nick and I, we text and message almost all the time. So it's weird that like we have this time, but I was like, okay, this is not just like a casual conversation. We have a time. So I was like, I'm rushing to get off of work, and Nick knows my current surroundings where I'm recording from. I am not at my house, so I did not have time to go home and get the beer that I wanted to bring. It was very Norse mythology. The vibes of Norse mythology were all over it. It was called a blood axe. It's a grapefruit style wheat ale and a winter ale, and it was a beer that our mutual friend Josh Patterson from Rethinking Faith, a podcast that anyone listening to this should check out as well. Um, he had curated the beer for last year's beer camp, and since my wife and I drive to beer camp every year, this will be our fourth year driving to beer camp. We brought home a bunch of beer. Blood Axe is my favorite beer right now. I saved one up for Nick. Maybe if we do a part two of this, I'll actually have time to go back and get it. But it's just a black cherry soda tonight.
Hell
It's
yeah.
just so bland and boring.
No, dude, this will make up for the time when we did drinks. I don't remember who it was with. I think it was with Josh or something, or with,
Didn't you
everyone
drink
was,
water or something like that?
yeah, I had tea. I had hot
Oh
tea.
yes, you had tea.
And you were like, why didn't you make it a hot toddy? And I was like, oh yeah, I guess I could have done that.
It was well within your power to do so.
But we got the cherry, and I'm sticking to PBR because it would make our friends who are craft beer nerds very happy that I'm drinking this. And I feel like it's a little closer to quality to what the Vikings were actually drinking.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like old style actual like mead I have had once in my life, and it is honey flavored dog shit. Like
Oh,
it
it's
is like
horrible.
here's the thing. Like I think more I'm I'm trying not to be as unhinged as our text chain is, but the crazy thing about like when people look back at like Norse stuff, Viking stuff, they're just like I feel like they get off to the idea of it, and then they actually try it. And they're like, oh God, that sucks. And I'm like, yeah, maybe like we have gotten some things improved some things and gotten things better, but I love trying like modern meads and things that are like that. I don't have a steady diet of it,
Right.
but no, I'd be down. I think Will Rose bought me mead once, and we tried it, and we're like, well, now we can say we tried it. Let's go back to the beer we actually enjoy. But
Dude.
anywho,
No, I love it. And speaking of things we enjoy, in the modern era, is there's been a lot of different renditions of Lord of the Rings now, right? There's a lot of different renditions of Thor, and their pervasiveness in pop culture is kind of wild. And I think because of that, the popularity, or I guess I would say the continuous rising popularity of like Norse mythology has been like it can be attributed to largely the MCU, I would say, particularly related to Thor and probably the
yeah.
comics, and then even to um, Lord of the Rings via the Peter Jackson films and onward. But that's kind of what we're here to talk about, to see what our opinions are, our experiences. And so, what is your experience, one, with Thor? How did you get into the Thor thing? And then also, because you are a Renaissance guy when it comes to nerdy IPs, well, like, what was your, tell me how you got connected to Tolkien as well, and maybe, share some of that.
So I actually need to do this the reverse way, Nick,
Cool.
because you've heard this before. But for those of you listening and you have not heard my nerdy backstory, um, my first fandom that I became really obsessed with Star Wars. I remember renting the VHSs for the original trilogy on repeat all the time. Like what I knew as New Hope, I would rent for a week, watch it, then go switch it out for Empire, and then go switch it out for Return of the Jedi. But in 1999, a little film called The Phantom Menace came out, and it blew my fucking mind all over. Now, OG trilogy people and maybe snobbier Star Wars fans would be like, Phantom Menace. I'm like, it was an original Star Wars movie being created in my lifetime. I was 9 years old. I remember distinctly the first time I saw Darth Maul, and I was like, who the is this guy? Like, I didn't know Satan was in Star Wars. Like,
The double lightsaber, come on. Come on.
oh yeah, the when the second lightsaber ignited on in the trailer, I was like, this is my entire life from now till forever. And so I became obsessed with Star Wars as a kid. My family was not an overtly nerdy family, so Star Wars was a kind of an easy entrance ramp. But then in the early 2000s, this thing came out called The Lord of the Rings. And I was obsessed with it. Like I remember to this day, like watching just as a much younger Tolkien appreciator, I skipped Fellowship so many times. And as I get older, I'm like, oh, I think Fellowship might actually be my favorite movie, or but Return's probably still my favorite movie. But I would watch those movies. The Battle of Helm's Deep always got me amped up. The Black Gate speech, Viggo Mortensen delivering those lines, goosebumps every time. That is my Lord of the Rings tattoo that I have planned, Nick. I don't know if I explicitly ever told you that, but
No.
like Lord of the Rings became a big deal. I had one friend in junior high where we would do sleepovers, and it would be an all weekend thing where we would see, if we could just binge watch extended Lord of the Rings. We probably did that 3, 4 times, a year as friends growing up. So really based in Star Wars and Lord of the Rings early on. I was a Jurassic Park kid. I was a fan of all sorts of different like nerdy IPs at the time, but wasn't really a comic book kid because I grew up in rural farming communities. My dad was a pastor in small towns in Iowa, so we would jump around from place to place. Not exactly a big comic book scene in those towns. My dad had to fight the congregation just to like allow his son, a weird dynamic there, but allow his son to play Pokemon and Digimon. Or Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Like I was an American anime kid in the time of me being in high school though, the MCU started. And I was
Yeah.
familiar with the Fantastic Four movies, with the X-Men movies, and I liked those. But then the MCU started, Iron Man, and Captain America, but then Thor. I remember seeing the trailer for the first Thor movie and being like, oh my gosh, this is like every piece of Star Wars I love mixed with every piece of Lord of the Rings I love, because it had the costumes and the grandiose, aesthetic of a Lord of the Rings, but it also had the space special effects, the lasers, the blasts, and the villains that looked, like Star Wars villains, and it was a perfect amalgamation of everything I loved about those two franchises that really jump started my fandom, my beginning of nerd culture. So that's how Thor came into my life. That's how Lord of the Rings came in my life. And then the comics came after the movie, but right after the movie had come out, a writer named Jason Aaron had started writing a pivotal piece of Thor literature called The God Butcher. And I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more about this, but it was a pivotal uh, story in my personal life because that story came along a little bit before my full, what you would call a deconstruction, would be in the evangelical community. But that story gave me a common character that I already knew, and it introduced elements to help me understand what gods are worthy, what gods are not. And that is kind of like I know that that's like a soup to nuts kind of version of my nerd story, but I hope that gives maybe people a little bit more of a context of how I'm approaching Norse mythology and Tolkien and Thor, really being an appreciator of all of them, and all of them in some way influencing the person I am today.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you sharing. Just because I think, especially going to the God Butcher part, and I won't stay here too long because I'll let it pop up as we go along. But, I know that you did a recent, episode with the dudes at Systematic Ecology on
I
like
did.
pop culture and like religion and things like that, and how really these, especially us coming from like evangelical backgrounds, where we didn't know that we were wrestling with bigger questions subconsciously, right? And as we started going through school to be pastors and doing the damn thing and like wrestling with the deconstruct, right? All those things. And they emerged through those stories that were so meaningful to us.
Right.
And so with things that we don't have confidence in, right, as far as things that we were told was the essential thing, we do have confidence, at least maybe more so, I don't know, in these things that have been reliable to us, right? The Lord of the Rings, Thor, that
Yeah.
sort of thing, and kind of why it's so important for us and why we want to talk about it all the time. Um, so I guess at this point now, since we know more about you and where you're coming from, now tell us like give us the background for Thor, because I think a lot of people here will
Okay.
know like the OG Thor origin story, but give us like the Marvel Thor origin story here.
So, specifically, I mean, like you said at the beginning, Nick, like Thor as a Norse deity, what a lot of people in back in the day would call it a pagan deity. He is a public domain character. You can adapt Thor just like you can adapt Dracula or Robin Hood or King Arthur or Frankenstein. Like there are certain characters in the public domain that you can create your own version of. Now,
Winnie the
copyright,
Pooh.
yeah, Winnie the Pooh, weirdly.
Yeah,
You know, what was that a few years ago there, that horror movie,
yeah,
slasher movie was like
like Blood and Honey or
Blood and
something.
Honey. So freaking ridiculous. But sorry.
Sorry, my bad. No, that was me.
Oh, that was so good. Um, so Thor is one of those public domain characters, and there is actually a DC version of Thor, and
Oh,
that version of Thor has faced off against the likes of Superman and Batman before. But Marvel's version comes a few years after the creation in the early 60s, 61 and 62, the creation of Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, the Incredible Hulk. Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, two of the fathers of the Marvel resurgence, this explosion of creativity in the 1960s, that basically every, I'll say, most of the Marvel characters both Nick and listeners, were created by these two men collaborating. Now, credit is really difficult because the way they created these heroes was something called the Marvel method, where an editor or a writer would pitch an idea, they would give kind of a loose outline, the artist would go then draw the comic, and then it would be handed back to the writer to finish out the scripting and really to put the story in with the art. So credit is really, really difficult to uh, prescribe to a lot of these characters. Thor is often, Stan Lee's version of the creation of Thor is that he wanted a hero that was different, that was godly, and they had already, people knew the Roman pantheon, people knew the Greek pantheon. Those characters were also public domain, but he was looking through, books, and I don't really know specifically what he was looking at, but he found information about the Norse pantheon. And he said, oh, well, the mightiest one of these is this guy called Thor. He can command, lightning and storms, and he's strong. And he also has this hammer that's, it's a weapon, but it's not like a sword. It didn't feel cliche to him. And on the other side, Jack Kirby is kind of a renaissance man as an artist. He famously, he had helped create Captain America in the 40s, and he was a titan of the industry at that point. A little fun fact about Jack Kirby: he is largely considered one of the creators of the romance comic. So things like, not specifically his character, but teen love stories like you would find in like an Archie kind of comic, those kind of stories, the young love stories, something that Jack Kirby had a big influence on. Jumping forward though, Jack Kirby had this really not Tolkien level, but he had this appreciation for Norse tales and Norse myth. So they kind of collaborated on this idea, and Thor was born, and he's 60 years old now. So he's
Wow.
been around for a long time, and from the mid 60s on, he has pretty consistently. No, I don't think there's really been any massive skips. He has had an ongoing monthly book, a new story come out every month practically since then, with very limited interruptions.
Wow. That's wild. Well, and as I was kind of doing some homework for here, like I can't remember like the Jack Kirby and Stan Lee runs, but oh, what's his name? Gary Conway? Is that am
Jerry
I
Conway, yep,
Jerry Conway, that run that I was reading some of those too, and they specifically get super meta with it, where they're like, "Oh,
they do.
read this issue to find out about this," or the Poetic Eddas, of course, and you're like, "Oh my
Yes,
God, this is so sick."
yeah. Well, that's something like I'm assuming we'll get to this at a certain part of the conversation. Is some creators, when they approach Thor, because there's source material, some of them lean heavy into the source material. Some acknowledge it, but don't really want to sit there. And there are others that are like, yeah, we're not going to acknowledge the source material that probably no one's read. We're going to acknowledge our own source material that we've been creating for decades. And like Conway was one that really I think he got the overall themes of Thor, but there are some creators like Walt Simonson who in the 80s, he really dug deep into the mythology of not just Norse mythology, but kind of like Fey mythology too.
Yeah,
The gentleman that is writing Thor right now is named Al Ewing, and he literally starts every issue of his run of Thor with a little bit of a clip or a quote from one of the Eddas. So
that's so
he's
sick.
he's leaning heavy into it, especially with his overarching stories. But that's we can dig into that a little bit later if you want to. But that's kind of just an overview of his creation, kind of like how people approached him in the beginning.
Yeah. Well, and I think that there's sort of a divide in the fandom. And I don't think it's now there's some people who are gatekeeping, but I think it just happens where something popularizes a character, right? Like the MCU, right? Most people know Thor from the MCU almost
I do,
exclusively,
yeah,
right? And, or people to this day still know Lord of the Rings because of the Peter Jackson films. And
right,
there's fans that stay there. And then there's like the gate where there's other fans like us who those have become like stepping stones deeper into, right? Oh, here's this
right,
Thor goes back all the way to the 60s. Holy cow. Oh, these books, have this long history from the 50s. Oh, and this book came out in the 30s, right? The Hobbit, et cetera, et cetera. And so I guess from maybe like your evaluation of like, okay, you've given us kind of the origin story, you've given us your origin story of how you got connected with Thor, but like based on the current state of Thor, both
yeah.
MCU and current runs, like where do you see those kind of connecting and why, he's still maybe pervasive.
So I think for modern, we'll say for the last 20 years, uh, there are two main people that are responsible for Thor being a character that people can relate with, people can go to the next level with, and have really gravitated to them. One is Chris Hemsworth. Like, there is no modern Thor popularity without Chris Hemsworth.
Right.
And I know that fact, I'm getting really niche, but like it would kind of be like someone saying like there is no modern Aragorn without Viggo Mortensen.
Yeah.
Like that is kind of the comparison that I draw. Hemsworth stepped into that role as a relative unknown, and the entire like Robert Downey Jr. was already an actor who had been working in Hollywood for a while. Chris Evans hadn't been doing, he did the Fantastic Four movies. I about said he hadn't been doing action movies. He was this charismatic, good-looking guy who had done rom-coms, and you had put these franchises of Iron Man and Captain America on these very charismatic, somewhat known properties. Chris Hemsworth was not a known commodity at the time. Neither was Tom Hiddleston either. You had, in that first movie, you have Anthony Hopkins,
Right.
you have Rene Russo, you have a few different people that help carry the gravitas of it, but Hemsworth and Hiddleston are unknowns walking into a major franchise that is already being planned to be made into this Avengers thing, and both of them were going to play pivotal roles in that movie. If Thor had flopped, there's a very good chance Avengers flops
Yeah.
because two of your big pivotal points in that movie were starring as relative unknowns. So I think Hemsworth succeeding in the role of Thor really, really helped him caring about the role of Thor, him making it his own. If you watch the first Thor movie, he's trying to speak in a somewhat Shakespearean accent. By the third movie, that's totally gone. Like Thor might as well be Australian by Age of Ultron.
That's
So
so real.
it is fantastic. Like in terms of like the work he put into the role, how he has really gravitated to the fan base. I have several friends that have met him in person for Thor appearances and say he's a delight. And I'm sure, like any other famous actor, I'm sure he has his bad days when he's just like, I don't want to sign a million things. But I think Hemsworth is one where he made him popular. It doesn't hurt that Hemsworth is a good looking dude to put on a movie poster. I think he embodied what the MCU's Thor was going to be. And I love him in this role. I hope he gets to do it a few more times before he hangs up the hammer and is done. Because it'll be a sad day when he's done playing Thor. The second person I would say is most to thank for the modern resurgence or relevance of Thor is Jason Aaron. Jason Aaron's run on Thor in the mid 2010s goes over 100 issues. For a writer in modern comics to be doing stories for a character for close to 50 issues would be insane. 100 is almost unheard of.
Yeah.
So he got to create and flesh out an entire world. And I've been blessed to have several conversations with him for our podcast, but also like every so often he'll just like pop in and send us a message, be like, "Oh yeah, by the way, that was something I was thinking about, when I was writing," and I was like, "You just okay, cool." Um,
Thanks,
but
Jason Aaron.
it's just crazy how like he'll just like stuff, or like he'll put a comment in like one of our posts and be like, "Oh my God." It's crazy. But one of the things that he really built his Thor run out of was this question of what gods are worthy. And Jason Aaron is an expressed atheist. He does not believe in God, but one of his guiding questions was, I don't believe in God, but if I did, what kind of God would I want to believe in? And if you read his run of Thor, it is so impossible to miss that question because he asks it in so many different and refreshing ways. His run on Thor, the reason why it may keeps Thor relevant is it asked a better question. It kept asking better questions, and some people boil his run down to, oh, Gore the God Butcher's badass, and I don't like Chick Thor. Like there is there is a believe it or not, in a fandom that is mostly white male centric. Uh, thankful for all queer fans, for ladies that have liked Thor, for people of color that have loved Thor. But let's be honest, most Thor fans are probably guys that look like me, and I think for Jason's run to be reduced to those two things is kind of a crime because there are so many different questions he asks about divinity, about worship. There are whole stories within this 100 issues where the concept of worship is fleshed out. And that is incredibly engaging for me, especially being someone that was deconstructing at the time. I wouldn't have known to call it then. But being asked these questions in a very covert way was very, very, very good for me. And not that there haven't been great writers that have covered Thor since then. I just don't think any of them have been as revolutionary as he was. So those two men, I think, are the most to thank for Thor being relevant in 2025 and having been relevant for a large part of the last 15, 20 years.
Yeah, that's so good. And just thinking about the fandom, issues of fandom, and then of course what those issues of fandom related to how they read the works, right? And those issues, because Tolkien fandom also has the issue of being primarily dominated by white dudes. And unfortunately, most of them, well, I don't know. Like I said, this is purely, anecdotal or whatever. But I think that majority of Tolkien fans are generally casual and fine, but the most vocal ones reduce the work to being like, this is about God fighting Satan, and Tolkien being a champion for Western values. And you're like, I want to kill myself. Um, and I'm sure as somebody who loves Star Wars and the MCU, you've never
Oh,
experienced anything
it's
like that. Yeah. It's never happened to you.
we literally a few months ago we had someone reach out to the podcast account and they're like, hey, like we've been talking like for a while, like I really like your show. I just have to ask, like like what kind of like Thor podcast is this? And I'm like, well, hold on. Like those guys on the internet that like love Thor as like this blonde hair, blue eyed, Aryan symbol, like that is so not us. Also, people that look at the Marvel version of Thor and think that's what the Norse like the historical representation of Thor was are absolute idiots because that is not like Thor in Marvel comics, everybody does not look like how he is described in Norse mythology or Norse stories. So people that like take the Marvel version of Thor and make him something he first of all isn't in the comics and isn't in Norse mythology baffle me. But that's just a little bit of a soapbox.
No, 100%. I mean, dude bros, not knowing history or facts and like what?
Shocking,
It's crazy, dude.
surprising.
Um,
Oh
so,
my
but those
gosh.
issues are real. And I think, like you said, but being fans of those things and reconnecting them to like, okay, here's what people who have modern comics are a little different compared to like Tolkien a little bit, but there's adaptations and things. But Jason Aaron and Chris Hemsworth with the MCU, right? And you're like, okay, here are the good elements here. And it's not just hot Chris Hemsworth or like, um, controversial atheist Jason Aaron, right? You're like
Yeah, yeah.
these people do like amazing things with these characters, and I think that there's a reason why people keep returning to both, Thor, the Marvel universe, as
Yeah.
well as, Tolkien and Lord of the Rings in different ways. But why do you think that Thor specifically keeps becoming repurposed for stories now? You know?
Personally, I can only answer for myself because I don't know if this is an overarching thing, but I think the question of worthiness always matters.
Yeah.
Literally, we end every episode of Across the Bifrost with "Stay worthy." One of my co-hosts is a cosplayer, and he has several versions of Mjolnir, but he has one Mjolnir that's on his his bedside table, and he does the thing that Hemsworth does in one of the movies where he picks it up every morning. He's like, ah, still worthy, and he puts it back down. Like it's like a ritual for him. And I love the question of worthiness, the worthiness of an action, the worthiness of a conversation, the worthiness of a friendship, of an interaction, of did I do the right thing in that moment or did I not? And I think that is what makes Thor interesting to me because if you just put up, pure stats, like any Marvel fan listening I would literally invite this fight. Thor, Thor should mop everybody in the Marvel universe. But the one thing that can keep him from his power is not a stronger villain, is not, not some kind of cosmic-y, whatever. It is is the question of, am I worthy?
Mm.
So for a moral failing to be what keeps a god of gods away from his godlike power, that is interesting to me. Like Superman doesn't have that. You
Yeah.
know, uh, you know, uh, Batman is not worried about if he's worthy or not. He just wants to get villains off the streets of Gotham. Uh, you know, uh, Iron Man's question is not, am I worthy? It's, am I smart enough? Can I figure this out? I would say Thor is more akin to one of my other favorite superheroes, Captain America, where he asks a moral question and his effectiveness as a hero is determined by the answer to that moral question. So that, for me personally, that's why his stories don't get old. Uh, is because behind everything, there's that question of worth and worthiness that I ask myself every day. Maybe not explicitly, but with my actions and my thoughts and my words, I'm asking it constantly.
Yeah. No, I love that. And even from the very brief set of comics that I read for Thor, like even that question gets asked even when Thor is Dr. Don Blake too. Like there's a point where he's like, I should just leave this hammer alone, right? When it was just an aspect of which I know there's a whole bunch of like meta stuff related to that
Yeah,
before that,
yeah.
right? But like at that point, before it became meta and it was just a transformative tool, right, to turn him into a
Right.
superhero, he's like, I think I just need to give this up. And that question of worthiness is there even at the very beginning of Thor's comic book origins. Am I right in making that assessment?
Oh yeah. I mean, that's so that is a fairly common thing with Silver Age superheroes in the late 50s and 60s. That there had to be a way for the stakes to get amped up and it not just be like a better power set. So you see in a few different heroes, like this just popped to my mind, is Thor struggles with worthiness, Donald Blake, wondering, well, should I just give this up? uh, when Captain America resurfaces in the 60s, he is a man out of time. Everything he knows, everyone he knows is dead. So where does he belong in the modern world? That's the question he's constantly asking. He's not asking himself, I wonder if my super soldier serum is, good enough to beat, this, other group of offshoot Nazis this time. That's not the question. It's, do I belong in this time? Peter Parker's question that he always asks is, have I been responsible with my great power? One of the common things with Spider-Man is when Spider-Man wins, Peter Parker loses. And when Peter Parker wins, Spider-Man loses. So there's this constant tug and pull. Am I using my power responsibly? And there's times where Peter walks away from the suit, but then is, because we got to sell books, he's called back in, but it comes down to that question of responsibility. I think that is one thing that when you get into the Marvel and DC Silver Age of comics, which again, sorry, I'm using like these shortcut phrases for comic book fans. But from the mid 50s, on into the early 70s, you have heroes being troubled with actual questions of importance and not just like, oh no, I hope this villain doesn't have that one magic rock I'm allergic to.
Right.
Like it's deeper than that. Um,
The shade. I love it.
well, but here's the thing: they do it with Superman too. Superman eventually grows to not just be the paragon of perfection. He struggles with his entire society and world and place of being was blown up, and he was uprooted as a child to come and essentially be an alien orphan. He's the last son of a dying planet. That is much more emotionally gripping than, I can, do all this shit. And gosh, I just fingers crossed they don't have that magic rock.
Please don't bring it. I say that as somebody who keeps coming back to Dragon Ball Z. So, the hypocrisy on my end is there.
It's quite damning, Nicholas. It's quite damning.
Um, yeah, so I guess, I'll kind of just give a brief thing here about just how,
Yeah,
Tolkien also I think one of the reasons people keep coming back is people are also wrestling with a certain set of questions with Tolkien. And I think you see this even with the characters, which you get people who are like, it's good versus evil only. And of course, the good guys win because they're on, the right side. And like you said, sure, that's like a very basic view of superheroes too, but there's more to that. And
yeah,
even when Aragorn's like, yeah, I'm the king of Gondor, like, what's up? He's also like, I don't know if I made the right decision. Do I go and save Frodo and Sam and take them to Mordor? Or do I go save Merry and Pippin? Right? And he's like, I don't know. And every time he goes through the rest of the journey, he's like, I don't think I got this right. Right. And so, like, most
yeah,
of these characters wrestle with those choices, and to say, like, am I doing the right thing for myself as well as everybody else
yeah.
that had those implications of heroes. um but I think that you know obviously, quite literally, Thor is drawing from the literal poetic Edda Thor, right?
Right, right.
And so Tolkien is doing he so just Tolkien, his main interest in like Norse mythology was linguistic. So Tolkien was a linguistic professor. But in order to study Old Norse, you had to go to the Old Norse sources, which were the Eddas. And so he came to translate them, and he actually started a club called the Coal Biters, and he spelt them in Old Norse. And it was literally him and a bunch of professors who were, if
Of
the
course.
literal translation is coal eaters, because it's so cold, you're by the fire, you eat coal. Very nerdy. Him and C.S. Lewis became friends because of it, and that's how the Inklings happened. But they bonded over reading and translating the original Icelandic sagas from their original languages. But Tolkien literally takes all of the dwarven names in The Hobbit are ripped from the Poetic Edda. There's a list of Ori, Nori, Thorin, Balin, Dwalin. It's all from the Prose Edda, and Gandalf as well. Um,
Patronizing bastard.
right, just Stan Lee and Tolkien and Jack Kirby, those mother lickers. um, but I think that like there's something there, and Tolkien called it the Northern Spirit, where it was this idea that like Vikings or people of Nordic, and then ancient Nordic cultures viewed the attempt at facing the darkness without any sense of victory, right?
Mhm.
It's like this Ragnarok's coming, and whether or not I die, like everything's going to die at one point, and I have to make a right decision.
Yeah, just quick editorial on that.
Yeah,
That is that is something, the pervasiveness of Ragnarok, of the end always being there.
yeah,
Just over the horizon. That is something in Thor comics. It's almost a cliche. That oh, when's Ragnarok going to be stopped again? When's Ragnarok going to be stopped again? There is a there's a not a Marvel comic, but another comic done by famed Thor creator named Walt Simonson, who was approached by another publisher, said, "Hey, we since Thor's a public domain character, we would love for you to do your personal version of Thor."
Oh, cool.
And it is right now, I think it sits at like 3 volumes, 3 trade volumes. But he's doing this. And it's not being released with any regularity. It's kind of like a prestige thing that he does whenever he has time. But it's a reimagining of the Norse stories, but after Ragnarok has happened. So all of Asgard, all the realms are destroyed. And what happens to Thor after Ragnarok occurs? Because in Marvel Comics, Thor has to stop Ragnarok. You know, the heroes of Asgard have to stop Ragnarok because if Ragnarok happens, well, there's no comics. Like, and
Right.
the few times that Ragnarok has kind of wiped the board, we have to resurrect people, we have to bring them back, and we have to kind of return to the status quo. But in Walt Simonson's book Ragnarok, you get a reimagining of what happens after the end. So that is another thing that people are looking for things to go read. Walt Simonson's Ragnarok series is fantastic, and the artwork is gorgeous. But yeah, the pervasiveness of Ragnarok is really important both in Marvel Comics and outside of Marvel Comics.
Yeah, and I won't keep us here just because for time's sake. But Tolkien, also had that where he takes it and mixes it with Old English related to Beowulf specifically, and it's this term that Galadriel says in the Fellowship of the Ring, and she calls it the long defeat. And so it's basically this idea that evil Ragnarok, no matter how many times you're going to defeat it, it's just going to come back, right? You got to I see this over other play IPs too. Buffy the Vampire Slayer too. There's an apocalypse pretty much every other episode, right?
Oh yeah.
And so stuff, and even too is I think not only is it for selling comics or books or TV or more TV episodes, but that's just kind of the experience of the human condition, right? Almost this idea of like every time I make that step and conquer these giants or this dark place in my life, I get to rest. Just kidding, right? The earth splits open and there's another dragon or whatever.
I mean, famously in the Norse stories, when Thor defeats the Midgard serpent and Jormungandr is defeated, he gets to walk 9 steps and then he himself dies. Like, so even in victory there is defeat. But from the I am paraphrasing massively, but after the defeat of the gods, Balder, the brave, and some of the chosen few are tasked with reestablishing the kingdom of the gods.
Yep.
And so there's defeat there, well, there's victory, there's defeat, but then there's also what comes after defeat. And I think that is one thing both comics and Tolkien and the sagas do really, really good is, like they allow us to ask the question, what comes after the end?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah, and hmm, I won't wax too philosophical here, but I think there's a different perspective where Tolkien was a Catholic, and even now we're influenced by this kind of Christian understanding of time where it's linear. And a lot
Yeah,
of these ancient cultures saw things as circular, right?
right,
And so it was just the fact of life because there always will be a beginning after the end, right? It's just a
right.
reality. At some point, everything is going to fall into dystrophy, but then Balder comes back, right? There's new gods, right? Thor's son lives or something,
Yeah, yeah,
that sort of thing. And Tolkien tried to write a sequel to the Lord of the Rings, actually, and it was called The New Shadow. And he had to put it down because the pervasiveness of evil was too much for him to handle because he viewed it as a line and he was like, if it's the end, like it's the end and like we still have to live, like what the heck, right?
yeah.
And so I wonder,
I,
I
I,
go ahead, go ahead.
well, I was just gonna say that. I mean, one thing that is, so it's the thing that kind of keeps me up at night when I'm thinking about Tolkien stuff. And I don't think on it. I don't think of it on the level that you do. I'll probably never get there. That's why I bother you whenever I watch the movies. Um, but there's kind of this like little like pocket of the fandom that's obsessed with like what's in the appendices and what
Hmm.
happened after the reestablishment of Gondor and Arnor. Like what happens after? Like what did Legolas and Gimli go do? What did the hobbits go do? What did Aragorn go do? Like what happens to these people after this? And some of those stories I know better than others, but I find it really fascinating that like even when the story is over, we're just like, yeah, but what's next? Like, what happened next? And I think Tolkien did readers a great service in doing the appendices and kind of like the ongoing tales that not as they're not as what would you say? They're not as exhaustive.
Yeah.
But we get snapshots of what happens after, and I think that's a really good thing, especially because he didn't end up doing anything really with that sequel.
Yeah. No, it's real. I mean, the tale of Arwen and Aragorn, right? We see it in the movies, but in the book, it's not there. But it is in the appendices.
Yeah,
Tolkien was like, it's not part of the narrative, but it's so crucial. I have to add like a little novel,
yeah.
a novella at the end of it.
Liv Tyler needs things to do.
So true, and things not related to the Hulk or Captain America.
I mean, believe it or not, like it's so funny when like when the Hobbit movies were coming out, it's like, oh my gosh, Ariel's not in the book. It's like the Lord of the Rings is the total sausage fest. It's like one female elf is not gonna kill you. It's like Eowyn and Arwen are like, oh, that's the only like chick representation you get. Well, I guess Galadriel, but anyway, sorry,
No,
it's my
well,
little thing.
Liv Tyler should have been in Brave New World more. Just saying. That's
I
my
could
two
not
cents.
agree more.
That's my 2 cents. I won't take us on a rant down, fixing fixing Brave New World, but um, let's see. So before we go here, we will be doing a part two because this has been way too much freaking fun. Is like obviously we've gone from okay, here's Thor, here's Tolkien, here's the Eddas, and then we've gone down the path of like, okay, here is how they've impacted and play with like deep philosophical conversations
Yeah,
about the nature of our how we should live our lives. What is reality? What is time, right? And how
right.
we should put ourselves to that. Um, but I think like, why do you think that I mean, you kind of talked about why we keep coming back to it based on your experience about worthiness, but we've asked this question in other circles of our friends, but like, why is it important to reflect on these things in this way, share them with each other, and then hope for more stories, right? After the appendices, right? Or hopefully Thor comes back or whatever.
Yeah,
Why do we hope for those? Why is it good?
it's a good question, and I don't know if I have a good answer. Um, so oftentimes I think I I get overwhelmed often when life does feel cyclical. I get overwhelmed when I feel like I'm just kind of doing the drudgery. I'm doing the trench work on life, and I'm like, man, if life could just like have not like the permanent end, but like if life could just have like an end of a chapter. Um, and that is just not how life works. Um, in my experience. Like like a few weeks ago, I had a really good week. I was locked in as a dad, as a husband, as a employed person. Like I was kicking ass in all areas of life. And then I went to bed that Sunday night, woke up that Monday, and the next week was not the same. It
Mm,
was not. I wasn't as locked in. I wasn't as energized. I wasn't as good to go. And halfway through the week, I asked my wife, it's like, what's wrong with me? And she's like, well, you had a really, really great week. Not every week is going to be that week. And I have the similar thoughts, with like with comics. I can go from a really, really great issue. I'm like, oh my gosh, this forever, please. And that's not how it works. I think comics and, specifically because Thor is the main book that I focus on and he's the main character that I care about. Um, the really, really great things, the truly worthy things, to keep slamming adjectives, the really mighty things about a good story don't always happen, but when they happen, it's easier to notice. It's kind of that way with, my days or my conversations or I don't know, like when something truly significant shows up, it helps me identify it more accurately. And it took like, Nick knows my wife. Like she knows like how she communicates things. So when Kim was just like, yeah, not every week is going to be that, I was legitimately down on myself. I was like, oh, I want every week to be like that. She's like, you want every week to be the best week. Like that's just not going to happen. And maybe that ties back into the cyclical nature of things. But does that answer the question enough? I don't, don't feel like I gave you a worthy answer.
No, I think that was fantastic. There's two things that come to my mind. One, I reminded your last comment about him asking you like, do you really want the every week to be the best week of your life? There's a episode of The Twilight Zone where
Um,
there's a dude who goes and he's like killing it every day. He's playing pool, he's winning at poker, he's getting the girls. It's, very early 60s kind of macho conquest. And he gets bored with it and he's like, this is the same shit every day. And one of his friends or whatever, he's like, oh, you thought it was basically like a good place. Like you thought this was the good place. You're in
thought this was the
hell.
good place. Yeah.
I'm Satan, bro. Welcome to hell.
Yeah. Well,
Um, and it was cool. It was a great episode, but kind of that same thing that what we desire, Tolkien says this too, the main sin of the elves, he says, is that they try to preserve things. And you had brought it up like staying in
yeah.
a chapter where he said it's like reading a book, stopping in a chapter that you like and never finishing the book. Like you said,
Yeah.
that's not how life works. That's not how books are written. That's not how stories are written. Um, and anyway, I don't know. What do you think about those two
Well,
things?
literally the concept of the undying lands of the Grey Havens, like that concept has always, Kim has gone multiple rounds with you
It's true.
on just that thought alone. But sometimes it's hard for me not to think of it as like, oh, they're escaping. They're running away from mortality. And someone like, Aragorn has an extended lifetime, and I have a feeling, when he gets done, he's just like, like, just, I did it. It's done. Um, I think there's a satisfaction in a thing being done and coming to the end of a chapter and coming to the end of a story. Um, you know, uh, the in the more figurative way, that's how stories should end. But the thing is, with something like comics, like they're never done. If the character is successful enough, they're never done. And that's one thing like with Thor that kind of just adds to that whole like it's never ending. Hopefully for my own fans' sake, it's never ending. It's a good reflection of life for me. But yeah, that weirdly works for me, I guess.
I love it. The good tales never end, man. Um,
Yep.
yeah. But yeah, dude, this is awesome. Before we go, tell people where they can find you, where they can find your content, all that good stuff.
So, Across the Bifrost is really the thing I pour the most energy and time into. From now, every now and then I get a wild hair and I want to try something different. But Across the Bifrost has been going for 4 years now.
Hell yeah.
So that's insane to me. A lot of it is we talk about the comics we enjoy, but sometimes you'll get us in the right mood where we'll talk about a really like philosophical thing or something that is meaningful, a subtext in a comic. Like recently, there's been a lot of subtext in Thor comics about kingship and worthy kings. And I'll let your imagination play with that one however you wish. But Thor just recently defeated the God of Kings. And that was a very interesting issue to read in a 2025 context. So there's sometimes things like that that pop up that are very thought provoking. A lot of times it's it's us reading comics and telling dick jokes to each other, and it's a lot of like what my group chats become. But then every once in a while we feel like being smart, and we show up for that. But Across the Bifrost is on Spotify, on iTunes. You can follow the show on Instagram at Marvel Thor Podcast. We have a lot of things coming up, for the Fantastic Four movie. We're gonna do a few things around that, and yeah, we're pretty excited about that. It's gonna be a lot of fun. It's a fun summer for moviegoers, especially people that want to go see superhero stuff. Superman looks amazing. Fantastic Four looks amazing. Like, go see these movies. They're not going to need your help at the box office, but like, go see them because I have a feeling they're gonna ask us some questions that either we continue to ask or we haven't asked yet. And I'm very excited to see what the reception of the movies are going to be. And mostly from like thinking people, not just people who are like, I don't like that the Silver Surfer's a girl. Those guys feel free to peace out. Um, but but anyway, yeah, Across the Bifrost, iTunes, Spotify, and on Instagram at Marvel Thor Podcast.
Sick, dude. I appreciate you doing this. Everyone, if you love comics, if you are a multi-fan, if you belong to multiple fandoms and comics is one of them, go hang out with Ryan, go listen to Across the Bifrost, and follow him on all this shit. So anyway, Ryan, we'll do this again.
We have to because we only scratched the surface.
Hell yeah.
We didn't even talk about Loki or any of the other.
Dude, we literally talked about Thor, kind of.
Yeah, like Odin as a godfather. Loki. There's so much we didn't talk about, and I never run out of things to talk about with Thor. So, and you don't do it with Tolkien. So, I think we should run it back immediately.
I agree. We're embodying the reality of story. Let's go.
God, so good.